We lost something on the screen. Oh, you're doing something else. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Birthing the Magic Collaborative workshop series for National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month and Black Maternal Mental Health Week 2023. We're excited to be presenting a program called From Fear and Guilt to Restoring Joy, a workshop to empower NICU mamas. My name is Dr. Joy Henderson. I'm currently an assistant professor of nursing at Pace University in New York City, as well as an administrator of the regional perinatal program of the #1 Children's Hospital in New York City. As a former NICU nurse and educator, I have supported many families on their NICU journey. And I'd like to introduce our panelists, Mia Malcolm and Kimberly Reyes, who will be sharing their NICU experiences with you. I'll just do a very brief introduction, and then I'll let them talk about their NICU experience. Mia Malcolm is a program manager at St. Louis Children's Hospital. She's an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion in healthcare. With her expertise as a former NICU mom and her roles as a DEI advisor and facilitator, Mia addresses disparities in care and guides staff education. She has co-authored publications on racism in neonatal care and serves on committees focused on elevating parent and caregiver voices. Mia's passion for DEI stems from her commitment to ensuring equitable healthcare experiences and challenging biases to impact outcomes for marginalized communities. Our second panelist, Kimberly Reyes, is a fellow New Yorker who, after college, moved abroad and began teaching, spending 12 years living in various countries around the world. She speaks fluent Spanish, French, and Italian. And in March 2020, her daughter was born at 26 weeks and would go on to spend over 3 months in the NICU. It was in the wake of this experience that she founded All the Unexpected, a podcast and website for families navigating the unexpected challenges of parenthood that now streams to over 60 countries. We welcome our panelists today. I'd like to place some ground rules very briefly as we begin our panel discussion. Each panelist will have about 5 minutes in the beginning to share a little more about their NICU experience, and then I'll ask a series of questions. You'll have approximately 2.5 minutes to respond. So if you can, keep your responses as brief as possible. And then hopefully at the end, we will have a few minutes left over for the audience to ask some questions. So my first question is, how did you, Mia, initially cope with the news of that your pregnancy was high risk and that your baby's condition was going to be a challenging journey?
So that's a really great question. I didn't really know that my pregnancy was like high risk. I had some challenges getting pregnant before, and it was high risk from that standpoint. So like the fact that I was pregnant, everybody was like, oh, okay, here we go, let's guard her, right? And so I found out that my pregnancy and my child, this guy right here, Gavin, his life was going to be different because the day before we were going to Waffle House. It was the day before Easter. And I had gotten to that stage where like it wasn't cute that I was still wearing regular clothes. I needed to go buy maternity. So I was like, well, if I got to go buy maternity clothes, I'm gonna go get something to eat first. And I started having like pains and called my doctor, went to the hospital, and they told me I was 3 centimeters dilated.
Oh
and
my.
I was 24 weeks and 4 days at that point. And then the next day I had him on Easter Sunday and I was 24 and 5. So at that point I knew, oh, this is not, we're doing something else. So yeah, so we went from there. And it wasn't an easy thing, right? I think the idea of like guilt and shame and fear and all that kind of stuff, all of it flooded at one time. And you got to think like being postpartum, right? Like you just have a baby, like all the movies and all your family, all your sisters and your friends, they had a baby, they go to the nursery, the baby, takes a bottle or gets on somebody's boob and y'all go home in a couple of days. Well, that wasn't going to be my journey and I didn't have anybody to talk to, but I also felt bad because I had done this to my child. And it's hard to cope with all of those feelings after you've just had a baby. And regardless of when you have your baby, your emotions and hormones are crazy and all over the place. So it wasn't great. I don't think I coped well. I coped as well as I knew how, right? But retrospect is everything, hindsight 2020 and all those things. But it was a hard adjustment because I just didn't know that this is how all of this was going to end up. I just didn't have that information.
So you basically had no warning at all.
I was at Waffle House.
You were at Waffle House.
Con waffle.
Oh my goodness. Oh my God.
That's the information
Wow.
I had.
Wow. So Kimberly, what can you share with us about how you started this journey into the NICU world?
Sure. So I was about 23 weeks pregnant, and I had started for some reason or another Googling, when do you know your water breaks? I'm like, how do you know? And it was one of these in my series of research things. And lo and behold, 3 days later, my water did break at 23 weeks. And I kept, I was sitting there and I'm saying, I think that's what this is. And that's a problem because they're 23 weeks pregnant. And so ended up being rushed to the emergency room, went to the emergency room. It was a series of different things, and it took a really long time and a bunch of students and a bunch of doctors for them all to be like, yes, your water did break. I'm like, okay, well, so now that we've confirmed that, what did we do? So I was pre-prom at 23 weeks, and they said, well, you're staying in the hospital. And I said, what do you mean I'm staying in the hospital? And they said, you're staying in the hospital and the goal is to stay pregnant as long as is humanly possible. And so in my mind, that was right at the end of February 2020. And I said, okay, well, she's due in June. So we're staying in the hospital till June because she's going to stay in there. And that's, you know, the thought process that I had. And I started reading miracles about pre-prom where that was possible. People had done that, right? And so in my mind, this is what we were doing. And about 3.5 weeks later, she had other plans. And we had done the dance every morning of putting her on the monitor and sort of doing all of that. And I had an interior placenta. So try and find a 480-gram baby on an interior placenta each morning. She, you know, it was quite the task to even find her in the first place. And they couldn't find her. They couldn't find her. They said, all right, we're going to go downstairs to labor and delivery because at this point it's been a couple of hours of us trying to find the baby on the monitor. We can't. Went downstairs. They said, we're going to do an exam. And then everybody's face dropped and the doctor like turned white and they said, the cord prolapsed. You are going to be flipped over, get on your knees and rolling through whole labor and delivery with a doctor kneeling behind me on a stretcher holding the cord in, and she was out 5 minutes later. So
Oh my goodness.
yeah, that was the story. So slight preparation, but also in my mind in the sense of I had said, okay, and you know, we were before viability when I first went in the hospital. And so that first, you know, I think it was about 10 days until we reached that marker, you know, you sort of held your breath. And then we did, and we knew, because when we had, you know, first gone in, they said to us, well, if she's born now, there's nothing we will do, not necessarily can do, but we will do. And that's a very interesting moment when you're told that, right? And so yeah, that was the beginning of the story, to say the least.
Oh, you know, you've mentioned some terms, and I think maybe
Yeah,
we might want to you know, kind of define some of those terms. You mentioned PPROM, and you know, just for our audience, what exactly does that mean?
The premature rupture of the membrane. So your water breaks before, I guess pre-prom is defined as 35 weeks, right? So if you're different,
So 37 weeks.
37
Yeah.
weeks, right? That your water breaks before. And so there are a lot of different theories, and it's one of those no one knows why kind of things, right? So it's one of those mysteries to this day. It just sort of happens. And so your water breaks well before you're meant to. And people have held on to full-term pregnancies when it happens. And but more often than not, it is a sign that the baby will come early for a very number of reasons. And I guess also the cord prolapse is when your umbilical cord delivers before anything else, which anyone can kind of figure out is not a great scenario.
No, definitely not. Okay, so thank you for clarifying that. Mia, you mentioned that you had these various feelings of guilt as a result of having delivered at 24 weeks. By the way, let's just clarify also, 24 weeks means that you are 6 months into your pregnancy. And so, you know, Kimberly was just before at 23 weeks. So she was just ending her 5th month. And Mia, you were just beginning your 6th month of pregnancy. So, you know, can you talk a little bit about those feelings, and then, you know, how you navigated through that during the, well, first of all, tell us how long your NICU experience was.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say shout out to Kimberly, because when she said like the grams, I was like, oh yeah, I know them grams. You know, when your baby born early, you know exactly, you know the grams, you know all the height. It was 680 grams. We out here 24 weeks. But yeah, I think so. We were in the NICU. We spent 268 days in the NICU. So that happened. And it was, I think the guilt and the shame, I think the shame is something that I've been able to navigate a lot better over the years. My son is 14 now. But the guilt of it is still really, really hard. Like his birthday is still a really hard day for me because I'm celebrating his birthday on April 12th and his birthday should be July 29th, right? Like I know that, and that's not lost on me. And anytime he has any sort of challenges, like a health scare or anything, all of those feelings come back because I'm like, if I would have just done the thing I'm supposed to do, right? Because as little girls, right? Not even as women, as little girls, we are given these dolls and we take care of these dolls, and we're like kind of, I hate the word groomed, but we're groomed to be mamas. Like it's the thing that like, right? So if you, and then as you grow up and you mature, you're told that this is a thing your body is made to do, right? And so like, then you go to do the thing and your body is like, no, thank you. That's what it feels like, right? It feels like my body was like, nah, it's not for you, right? Or like my body failed me, and then not failed me, but failed him. And that's really, really tough because it's your job as a parent. And I think, especially as a mom, you think it's your job to protect your babies at all costs, right? And so the idea that I did not do that for him, and then it's kind of started this cascade of things that have happened to him as a result of that are really, really tough. It's tough every time a doctor tells you something. It's tough every time, they don't hit those milestones. It's tough when IEPs come around for school. It's tough on birth. It's tough all the time. And so that guilt piece, guilt for me is like bias. It's not something that ever goes away. It's something that you learn to recognize, and then you learn how to like cope with in the moment. Like, do I need this? Is it useful, or do I need to get rid of it today? That's what the guilt of it always feels like for me.
Kimberly, do you want to chime in as to, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, no,
at the very beginning.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, especially I think, so we spent 109 days in the NICU.
Come on, numbers,
so,
you know the days.
Yeah, no, I do. And she
know
was
the days.
57 days old before I ever held her the first time. Yeah, no, all of those
my
things
goodness.
stick. Yeah. So, there was a moment where people would describe certain things that were happening, whether it be with her lungs or her eyes. She developed a condition called ROP, or radiopathy of prematurity, where their eyes, the veins in their eyes don't vascularize or develop the veins because they're meant to be doing that in utero, right? And so it's one of those things. And you continue to hear these things that people tell you, and you're like, well, if she was just inside me, this wouldn't be happening, right? And that's this sort of constant thing that happens. And I remember searching for a reason for, probably, maybe even to this day, if I'm going to be honest, why did my water break? And I was like, there's that time I sneezed really hard. And and I was sort of convinced that there would be some sort of explanation. And I actually had, a healthcare professional tell me, well, that could have been it once. And I was like, that's really awful. Like, you're, and so you had this whole moment of just being like, I sneezed and this whole thing
This is what happened.
Yeah, and so you end up in these scenarios that seem a bit absurd because you're so far down this thing. But yeah, there's I that resonates 100%, that there's a sense as a mother that you're supposed to be the protector, and that all of these things that they're going through. And I mean, I've watched her be reintubated. I've watched more heel sticks than I could ever want to have to see. And guess what, when they tell you they're going to put all those little IVs in a kid and those marks will disappear, no, she's 3 and I can still, in the right sunlight, see lots of dots on her arm. And so it's one of those things where you continue to say, like, I somehow did something wrong. And that's a very sort of difficult pattern to get out of. And it doesn't, I remember the first time she got a cold, and I said, oh my God, it's the end of the world. And it was, all of those feelings came flooding back, right? And that's a very real and a very important thing to kind of keep in your mind, that just when you least expected, certain feelings may in fact resurface, right, and remanifest.
One of the things it sounds like, I mean, you all got really good in what we call NICU speak, right? And you basically had to learn a new language. And I know I mentioned earlier that, you're fluent in, several languages, but Mia, talk to me about how that, especially in the beginning stages, how difficult was that for you to navigate that world? that you weren't expecting to be in?
Yeah, I think that for me it was complicated for a couple of reasons, right? Because like when my son was born, I was in pharmacy school. And so there was also this expectation from like everybody else that I understood what was going on, right?
Mm,
So when like rounds were happening or when doctors were coming in to like talk about all the things, and then they would leave and everybody is like looking at me like, okay, yo, what's going on? Like medical explain this. And I'm like, I'm not his pharmacist. I'm not here as his doctor. I'm his mama. I don't know what's going on. Like, right?
mhm.
I'm swimming and drowning, mostly just drowning, and y'all are looking at me for the lifeline. It's gonna be a no, right?
It's not happening.
I don't have it to give you, right? And so I think that that was like really, really hard. And then there is also something to being on the other side of the curtain, right? Like, because if I were in my true space, I would not be on this side of the curtain. So I'm
Mhm.
having a different experience of the environment that I'm supposed to be a part of. And, oftentimes I feel like when your kid is in the hospital, there is a piece of you that wants to be the adult in the room, but like emotionally, you revert back to whatever age your kid is at that time. I was
Mm,
newborn in an adult body trying to navigate real adult conversations. I did not have the capacity, right? And so you're trying to understand, and then it like a certain point it clicks and like everybody needs to stop and talk to me. Stop talking to each other and talk to me because I don't
mm,
know what's happening and this is my whole baby. Like I got to take him out of here. So somebody has to talk to me in a way that makes sense to me. Right. And like looking back, I knew a lot of the things that they were talking about a lot of the time in retrospect, right? When I'm not in active trauma, when I'm not here punching the air, like, why is this happening to me? Right. And I'm not trying to navigate him and his dad and my daughter and my family. And you're trying to do all of these things. So I think it's really, really tough to like figure out how to because in the NICU, you're not the parent, you're the caregiver and you're the physician and you got to be a nurse and you got to be a RT, a PT, a OT, a speech therapist, you got to navigate all of these different the neurology team, you a pulmonologist all of a sudden. You're all of these things you never imagined that you would be when all you want to be is somebody's parent. That's the only thing you signed a contract with this kid to be, but you don't get to be that. You have to
mm,
be everything else because his mom would be able to just go pick him up and hold him, right? But I got to ask permission for that because he connected to 75 million things, right? His mom would just be getting up, changing diapers or feeding and doing. I can't do those things. So I'm not his mom, I'm his caretaker. And then I'm all of these lists of all of these other things because I got to understand. And that's tough, man. Like it's a crazy journey.
Do you want to add anything to that, Kimberly? What did you find was the most challenging thing when you first got into the environment of the NICU?
I mean, you're also, so if you undergo a crash C-section like I did, I remember just
Mm,
being discharged, coming probably the next morning again, because and so we were also, by the way, she was born March 18th, 2020, the day New York locked down. So everything that happened, sort of the whole world went insane all on the same day too. And
mhm,
so neither my husband and I were allowed together. Right. And so, she was 108 days old before all three of us were in a room together. Right. It's one of those things that, you think about just the extra support. And I remember just that first day walking from the elevator and she was in the farthest place humanly possible in this giant NICU and just having a moment of just like needing to sit. And I remember being faint and the nurse looked at me and I was like, I gotta sit. Cause on top of that, you're wearing a mask, you're all, all the things that were
mhm,
going on. Right. And so just the physical challenge of saying, all right, I have to be strong for this, tiny frail creature, but you guys just cut me open, and so all of the things that had happened then. And yeah, it's interesting, the idea of all the hats that you have to wear except for the one that you're meant to wear, right? And so, and me, yeah, I'm no medically trained person, but I am an historian, I'm a scholar, I read. So I was the one sat there with saying, okay, so you've got that journal article, so I'm going to read 3 other ones and we're going to sit here and talk. And we had both rounds that we were present in. We insisted on being called if we weren't there every single day for 109 days, and they knew you were not rounding without us there. And even if, everybody's attending, that the whole world is fawning over, and I raise my hand and say, well, why are you going to do that? And, and the look that they would give me, and I'm saying, well, I know, no medical expert here, but I've read this journal article, and somebody in Boston has tried this. Are we maybe going to try that? And there were a number of times where we went back and forth, and I felt, I'm saying, I'm no trained expert, but I am a trained critical thinker, and I'm reading something, and I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask you to explain things to me, and we're going to sit here until it's crystal clear to all of us in the room what's happening and why it's happening. And that was a really huge piece of, yeah, I couldn't decide when she ate, I couldn't pick her up, right, for 57 days, I couldn't do all these things, but I could make sure that I knew what was going on. And that was a very big piece of me kind of having a semblance of peace of mind, even as insane as everything, including the whole world, was at that moment, right?
How did that come across?
I'm sure
Not
those
great.
people threw a party when we were discharged.
Period.
I'm not gonna lie. I mean,
Period.
like I was the one putting signs on the NICU, like, and having the child life lady, and she said, you can laminate that sign. Let's laminate these signs. And, telling the next mom, did you know you could ask for that? Did you, and saying, so yeah,
Period.
I think everybody was like, oh, these people are finally caught. Because we made it a point, and it was one of those things where you were going to see us and we were going to be there, and you knew that nothing was going to be done with my daughter because somebody was watching. One of us was there, one of us was going to be watching. And when that became very apparent, I think there was a different approach, and it's there. I think at some point it became a level of mutual respect, because we weren't just making things up, we weren't just causing trouble, we were advocating, doing so with her, absolute best interests at heart, and doing so from a place of information and facts and knowledge. And did you read that Gem article? Because I did. Like, let's talk about this, right? And so that was a very big piece of saying, yeah, no, like I'm going to be informed. And yeah, I started using their own terminology, and I started saying, I understand what you're saying. And that was a piece of, I think, this kind of mutual understanding, where at a certain point everybody knew. And I remember one day the nurse said, oh no, they tried to not call you, but I made sure they called you for rounds because I didn't want to hear it when you came in. And I said, yeah, right, like this is, so that's a big piece of it. I think being able to understand that it is not only your place, but it is your right to be your child's advocate first and foremost. And however you need to do that, don't let anyone think that that's not your place, because you are the parent, right? Like I made this human, great, you're taking care of it, and you're saving your life, and I thoroughly appreciate that, but over here having made this human, right?
So Kimberly, you mentioned that you had your experience that coincided, I mean, exactly with the COVID pandemic. Mia, was your baby born prior to the pandemic?
Yeah, so Gavin was born in 2009. So he was born long before
Oh, okay. So
the world shut down.
oh, yeah, before the world, yes, was trembling. So who did you feel was most supportive of you and those, during that whole NICU journey?
As far as like NICU staff or like family or?
No, just in general. I mean, who did you really lean on? Did it change, from the beginning of the journey to as, as things improved and as you were getting ready to come home?
Yeah, I think, it again, the NICU is like it's a very singular experience, right? And I think, like my best friend had just had my nephew a year before. So my nephew was a year older than Gavin. And it was really hard because that's my best friend, right? Like this is like that's my person. We've been best friends since we was 14, right? And but I couldn't call her and really talk to her about what was going on because she didn't understand, right? There's one thing of like people pitying you and like, oh, that's so terrible that, and it's something different to like understanding what I'm actually going through and like being able to like help me navigate in that feeling. And I think that that was the part that was really hard, is that I didn't have a lot of people in
Mm.
my life who could do that. Now everybody wants to be there for you, right? And everybody wants to like, hey, I love you, I'm checking on you. And everybody, right? So all of those everybody's are also asking you the same 10 questions. And those same 10 questions, while you think that you're like, I'm showing up and I'm being there for you, those 10 questions are gut wrenching every day. I don't know when he's coming home. If I knew, we would not, like, I wouldn't be stressed out, right? Because if I knew when he was coming home, I promise you, I wouldn't have picked day 268. Wasn't a good number for me. I didn't enjoy it, right? So I think like for me, I found honestly the greatest solace in like talking to other parents. And so like, you know, there was a mom whose room was like diagonal from Gavin's room, and her baby was a 24 weeker, and he was like having, Gavin would hit these like roadblocks, and she was like, girl, we did that. Let me tell you, like, and like I would talk to her and like that, and then I met other parents, and that's the piece that made me feel like seen and like I wasn't going insane. Like I've been crying for 4 days straight, and everybody will be like, it's okay, it's gonna be fine. And I'm like, I don't want to hear that, right? I want to hear that it's okay it's okay, you're supposed to be crying for 4 days straight. 4 days ago was a crazy day. You should be crying for, like, that's a regular thing to do. You're not abnormal. You're not, right? Those were the things that I needed. And it was hard to get, because a lot of people never experienced that. I was the first person in my family who had ever had that type of an experience before. And so even my mom, who, listen, I burned this whole world down about my mama, but she didn't know what to do, because it's not just that her grandbaby is sick, I'm her baby, right? So like, what is she supposed to do? Me and his dad were having very different experiences at the same time. So all of it was very like clustery. So I found the greatest solace in talking to other parents, because it made me feel less like I was some sort of alien and there was something wrong with me and something wrong with the way that I was processing and wrong with the way that I was experiencing day 30 and day 59 and day 200. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I found the greatest joy in. So I can't even imagine having done it during COVID. I would have gone insane.
Yes.
Yeah, like who do you I don't know. Hats off to you, girl, because I don't know what I would have done.
So Kimberly, what did you do?
Well, I'll tell you this much: the hospital I was at made a mean brownie, and there was a moment, if not most days, and I would, after hour 6 or 7, and also it was the summer too, so it was like 30 degrees in the air conditioning. It's always so cold, and they'd be like, oh, the baby's like losing heat, and I'm like, cause it's an iceberg in here. Like, what are we doing here? Like, you're talking about she can't keep her heat. Like, me, who has got enough padding, is cold. So like, what are we doing here? But and I would take that 15 minutes to find normalcy, and I would, have a brownie and no caffeine because I was trying to nurse, and so I would, say, let me just have a hot chocolate, or let me have a boost of something that felt normal for even those 10 minutes. And you would just sit outside in the sun, and you closed your eyes and you said, okay, like, for these 5 minutes, I'm just going to sit here, right? And that was this kind of, tiny semblance of self-care. But yeah, it was, I think, in general, a very isolating experience, right? But then it was sort of hyper isolated at the time, because I don't really remember other parents talking to each other too much. Nobody was, everybody was so in that zone of like, we have bubbles and we're not leaving the bubble, and we're, and it was so hyper inflated at the time, of just no one really worrying about anybody else but themselves. And so I think at that moment, it was just a question of, can you even just kind of quiet your own thoughts for a second, and can you just say, okay, I'm gonna breathe for a minute, and I'm gonna eat a little bit of chocolate, and I'm gonna just, take a break and then go back in it. And I think doing so without too much reflection, without too much, oh, how long have we been here? When are we leaving? What are we doing? Because then it becomes so much noise, right? And I really relate to the whole idea of people asking the questions. People ask questions normally, and that's one of the things I like put on the site. I was like, questions you don't ask a NICU family, and just is like these helpful sort of things, because as much as you want to help, you have to realize that help has to be in a way that supports the person, not makes you feel better. And that's one of these like sort of real hard things to express to people. It's like, it's great, but are you helping so you can say, well, I called her 3 times this week, how many times did you call her, right? Or are you removing ego and saying, well, what does that person need? And if you don't really know what the thing that person needs is, right, then ask them, right? Or ask their partner, or ask somebody, right? And figure out what it is. And sometimes it might just be leaving them alone for a couple of days, right? It might just be giving them some space. It might just be dropping off a meal on the doorstep and taking a step back and say, look outside, I left you some chocolate, or I left you something, right? And so it has to be in a sense of really thinking about removing oneself and removing the ego of like, I feel like I'm helpful, and actually thinking of the acts and words and sort of moments of service that would really help someone, right?
And I would just say, to like piggyback off of that, I think it's so important, like as NICU parents, moms, whatever role that you play for that space, like to learn really early that it's okay to have boundaries, and that no is a whole and complete sentence. And you don't owe it to nobody. You don't owe nobody nothing, right? Like, I think that initial thing of like, I got all of this because I never left his room. Gavin was there for 268 days. We here. So like, we moving in. This is our new house. So we staying. And so like, I'm there for rounds every day. And I'm like, well, I'm here. His dad is at work. I know that my mama want to know what's going on. I know his mama want to know what's going on. I got to call my best friend. And I'm making the same phone call and reliving what has happened in that rounds, right? Because for a very long time, rounds were brutal. They were brutal. And so I got to call his dad. Hey, this is what they said, and listen to all his questions and try to answer those questions and write down what I didn't know. Then I got to call my mom and relive the story to her, and then listen to her cry about it. And then, right. And then I got to call his mom, and then I got to call. And there was a point where I just said, okay, this is the phone call I'm going to make. You need to disseminate information. Don't nobody call my phone. My phone is like, I'm not answering it. If I don't call you, we not talking, because I don't owe it to you to bleed myself out for the court every single day because y'all want to know what's going on. What's going on is he's still in the hospital, and I'm going to tell one person, and that person is their responsibility, because I can't do it. I can't be in the trauma drainage and like and be able to be his mom and be able to keep taking in information as they keep coming in. So I think the most important thing that I learned in being in that space is that I get to set boundaries, and guess what? They're okay. They are okay. They are well earned, and they're going to happen whether you like it or not. And if you're not interested in my boundaries, you can excuse yourself, see yourself out. But these are my boundaries for what this village needs to look like. If your goal, to Kimberly's point, is to support me, if you want to support me, these are the ground rules. If you
Yeah,
play
the group
outside of
text
those ground
is
rules,
your friend.
you can go, right? Because I'm not gonna do it. I'm just not going to. And I get to say no.
So you mentioned that, and those are some really, really good points, and hopefully we'll tie all these up as we get towards the end of our conversation. But how long did it take you to get to that point? And did you get to points where you felt like you were really at a breaking point? And then who stepped in for you at that point?
Oh, it took me 2 weeks. I was done after 2 weeks. Y'all not getting ready to keep playing with me. It's a no. Because I'm tired. And I thought, like, Gavin was born, he was born crazy early, right? And then overnight, the day that he was born, he had a stroke. He had a grade 4 IVH. So his brain was bleeding. And I had to sit in a room and listen to these people tell me that my son was probably going to die.
Mm.
They gave him 2 weeks to live. And baby, them first 2 weeks, there aren't words to describe the level of what you're going through, thinking that you're just sitting there waiting for somebody to, and that somebody is not like your elderly grandparent or your elderly, you know what I mean? It's your child. Your child. Like, he's just born and y'all telling me he's gonna die. Like, this is nuts.
Yes.
Right. And so after that, I cannot keep reliving this trauma for you guys. It's too much for me. I can't do that and do this. So I'm gonna do this. Somebody else has to do that. And when I got to the point, there was one very specific day where he had a really rough, like 10-day stretch. And his dad actually was like, all right, what do you need to have happen? Because you're about to lose it. And normally I would tell you, you need to go home and get some rest, but you're not getting ready to hit me for telling you to leave this hospital. So what is it that you need? And I was like, I just need to cry and I need a bag of chips. And he's like, I got the chips, do your thing in the corner, right? But like, it becomes so much. And I don't think that people recognize that, like, deal with your stuff and my stuff. Your stuff is not my business. And you call it selfish, and people are they're going to call you selfish, and they're going to be that. I'll be whatever you want me to be, but I'm not going to be on the phone with you. That's what you know, so it was 2 weeks for me.
How about you, Kimberly?
Well, it's an interesting sort of thing because we hadn't actually told the world that we were expecting. And so, yeah, so the number of people that knew that I was going to have a baby was rather small and really only just family. And then when I went into the hospital, that was like an even smaller number of people who really knew what was going on. And so I think she was probably, yeah, because she was born in the middle of March and on my birthday when we were kind of out of the woods, so to speak, for like after those first 2 weeks, we kind of knew we were going in a good direction, and we actually made a birth announcement. And everybody was like, "Wait, what?" You're like, wait a second, we didn't even know you were pregnant. What's going on here? Because I never even really showed I was 6 months pregnant, and so like I was just sitting there wearing a big shirt, and nobody even knew at my job. I was teaching. I went on leave when I went in the hospital, and they had to announce it in an email, and everyone's like, wait, what are you talking about? There's a baby. So it was this whole moment of so many people didn't even know, and there was like all of this information all at once. So okay, I'm pregnant and I had a baby and it was 3 months early, and now she's in the hospital and she's 3 weeks old, and everybody was like, okay. So there was a lot of catching up to do because yeah. Well, because really, you know what? I had been of the mindset that when you tell the whole world everything, then you start hearing all that noise. right?
Mm.
Everybody has advice, everybody has something to say, everybody has, like their 3 cents and all this other drama. And I said, well, what if we just like don't tell anybody and then we show up with a baby one day? And my husband's like, sure, sounds like a great plan. So the two of us, like we're married for a reason, thought this was a great plan. And even the people next door to us in the next apartment, like we came home and they were a baby and they're like, ah,
What?
yeah, where did this, and then, oh, we've been in the hospital for 109 days. Wait, what? And so like there was all of these moments of just people were a lot more just like still trying to process, wait, you're pregnant? Let alone like everything else that had got. Yeah. So there was a lot of like that whole circle that knew any sort of details was very small to begin with. And you know what's a big great thing? The group text. Because here's the group text that I keep on mute like all other group texts. And I'm going to put the information in there and you guys can talk amongst yourselves and send the picture, do whatever you want to do. And so like, this is the one place, like you said, you could be the one phone call or it could be the one message. And, that's what you're going to do. But I think it's a lesson in kind of keeping that circle smaller. And then somehow you end up being not less accountable, but you end up having less explaining to do, right? Because it's a question of, it's a need to know sort of thing. And so if you had seen me in the past 6 months, then you kind of knew I was having a baby. If you hadn't, well, I haven't seen you in 6 months. So surprise. Right? So it's an interesting sort of moment that, for us, it was more just like, there's a baby at all. And everybody was kind of like so busy being shocked about that nobody was really like terribly concerned that she had come 3 months early, right? So yeah, that's probably a pretty unusual set of circumstances.
What do you think were some resources that were most helpful to you while you were in the NICU? And then talk about that immediate period of time when you left the NICU. Because now you had been in the NICU this long period of time. How did that feel? So the first part is, what resources were helpful to you in as you moved your way through? And then the second part of that question is, how did you feel now once they handed the baby to you and you were walking out the doors?
So I'm gonna start at the second question and go back. So
That's fine.
when they told us it was time for him to go home, I thought they were lying. Because I was like, who's taking this baby home? Like, not this one. Like, do y'all know the shenanigans and tomfoolery that this child pulls? I can't take him home. Like, with who? Like, who's coming with me? So like that for me, because as much as I hated being there, I never wanted to have to be there. We have been there for so long and like so many things had happened, and like now all of these nurses, like that was my family. Like that was, it's like having your blankie taken away from you. And like you're not only is your blankie being taken away, but they're giving you this child who has just like been doing like things that you never even like, it never even registered in your brain that tiny humans would do. Like the gall of this child to behave this way. Like what is right? And so like I would think I was in a state of denial that like they're actually going to let me leave with this kid. Like that's a lot, because my son also went home like what we call now fully accessorized. Like he had a trach when he came home. He had a G button. Like we had stuff. Like we had accessories, and I was like, who? I mean, I'm not a nurse. I didn't go to school. I signed a contract with this kid to be his mama. That was it. Like, what else? So like that for me, like that initial part, but then like all of those people, that tight village, right? That small circle, all of those people came and they stepped in the way that I required for them to step in and support. And that for me was really important because again, you set those boundaries early, and then people understand and you have clear communication about expectations and things like that and what support looks like, so that people don't get to make up that end of the story. In the NICU specifically, again, I think it was a little bit complicated. You know, like some other Black people, I think have a complicated relationship with the idea of social work. So that was always tough for me. Um, that's a separate webinar, y'all.
It is. It is.
So that was kind of tough. And so I found a lot of help again in like those times where like families got to come together. Like there was this lady who would always, she would come to our room and like try to get me to come out and do scrapbooking. So like I could get out of his room for a second. And I was like, if this lady do not stop bothering me. But then like one day I finally went because he was having a really rough day. And I was like, if I stay in this room, I'm gonna drown. Like I'm gonna drown in the sadness. So I need to get out for a second. And I went, and it was actually really helpful to like make something. And like now I have a scrapbook of like all of his time, right? So like all of the, because his first Halloween was in the NICU, his first Christmas, his first Thanksgiving, my first Mother's Day with him, his dad's first Father's Day, like all of that, my birthday, all of that stuff was in the NICU. And so now I had a way to document that, and it made me think I was doing something good for him, since I couldn't do what I thought moms do for their kids. And so, those were like the little things. And again, I think like the peer support was really, really, like it was super clutch for me. Peer support was crazy clutch.
Okay. And for you, Kimberly, you know,
No,
when
it's
they
funny that she talks about the craft lady, and so you know, I was the kind of this,
Everywhere.
yeah, well, and I would just be, okay, just leave the kid here, just leave the kid, I'll do it, you know. And so, but they were also in those days like that's how they were doing it, right? So like you would normally have the craft circle, and instead they came around with like a sandwich bag and all the things to like make a picture frame. And it's funny because I'm sitting here at my husband's desk with the little wooden picture frame that says dad, that was supposed to be for the Father's Day. And so I laugh when I look at it, because I remember just saying, okay, just leave the plastic bag with me, because I wasn't going anywhere, right? But yeah, a lot of those in-person things that normally would have been that support were canceled, right? So there wasn't really that same sort of thing. And to be honest, that's kind of why I started doing the work I was doing, because I felt there was nobody there, right? And so it was a moment of, part of why I started All the Unexpected, because I was like, I don't think anybody else should feel so alone. I kind of have to just start talking to people so that, you know. And when I started going online and I started, you know, creating this community and joining people and stuff, the main goal was to make sure that nobody else ever felt that kind of isolation, right? And so I sort of was, you know, me in the sense of like, well, if it ain't there, I'm gonna make it, right? Like I'm gonna create this sort of thing. And I think that was a big piece of it. But yeah, that I relate to that moment of going home. And so yeah, it was odd because right before we went home, they unhooked everything finally. And I had never seen her, you know, without the lines and without the things and all this stuff. And I said, oh my God, like, okay, we're doing this. And then I remember we sort of just sat there the whole first night, like looking at her while she slept, like both of us on the other side of it, and just, okay, so what do we do now? You know, and it was this whole moment. And yeah, I think even the parent of a preterm baby will tell you, right? There is no preparing for that moment, right? Because as much preparation as you can possibly do, it hits you, right? Okay, so I'm the person in charge of the tiny human, and that's it, right? And it's exacerbated when it's in the NICU, because you become so used to saying, okay, but how am I gonna know if you know her oxygen's okay, because there's no number, there's no beeping, and there's no, you know, this whole sort of moment. So I remember just kept, you know, putting my ear there. Okay, do you hear? Yeah, we hear breath. Okay, but don't be too loud, because you don't want to wait, right? And so all of those sort of moments. But I think, yeah, that's a big piece of why I do the work that I do, because I want no one to feel so unsupported, right? And I think in the last few years there's been so much isolation for parents, in any experience, right? And whether it be that they spent a day in the NICU or they spent 200 or somewhere in between, right? And so that for me was a big impetus behind starting to do the advocacy that I do because I want people to know that you're not alone. Other people have gone through this. When you talk to, and like May was saying, right, when you talk to these other parents and you're like, okay, I'm not the only person who's ever had this happen, right? That's such an important part of it. That's such a huge piece of not feeling so alone and not feeling so much guilt with regards to, I did this to my kid and nobody else has ever done this. Everybody else did everything right. And you realize that it happens to other people. It happens for inexplicable reasons, right? It happens for ways that we can't even, imagine why, who, what, when. And that in itself is empowering, and it's also healing, I think, in many ways.
I can say really quickly, I think like to that point, Kimberly, like one of the reasons that the group that I now run in our hospital exists is because we're all parents of kids who have had that experience in the hospital, right? And as much as I think clinicians and physicians and all of those people, child life, everybody, right? All of those services that you have embedded in the NICU, I think that all of them are wonderful and they have great intention. And there is something to, when you hear somebody say, I get it, I understand why you're upset. I get it, I understand why you're sad. And you know that they have no idea. Like the first time it's like, oh, okay, thank you. But that fifth time in that one day, you're like, if y'all don't get out of here, right? But when somebody walks into a room and they tell you like I make it a point every time there's a new family in my son's old room in the unit, I go and I say hi to them and I'm like, hey, my son was in this room, 14 years ago, and there's something different to knowing like, oh, this person actually gets it. Like they were in the trenches taking these same grenades. Okay, like that's a different type of support. And it's so important to have that person tell you that you get to have a voice, and have that person tell you like, hey, you're going to go through the guilt process. You need to mourn the loss of the pregnancy that you thought that you were going to have, of that kid that you thought that you were going to know, and that experience that you thought. It's okay to go through the grieving process about that. That's a different type of conversation and information than hearing it from somebody who has no idea what that process even looks like, feels like, or sounds like. Like, it's a really, really important piece. Peer support, I think, is underrated in these spaces. And it has to be more of a cornerstone, especially if we want to start doing like real holistic care for families while they're in that NICU.
And not only that, to add on to that, not only has this person been there, but they came out on the other side, right? That's a big piece of it, right? So it's like, I've been there and it's possible to move forward. It's possible to be on the other side of it. And this is what it looks like. And guess what? There's joy, and there's birthdays, and there's milestones, and there's all of the things that you might right now in your mind feel like you may never have, right? And so that's such an important piece of it too, because there has to be light at the end of the tunnel. Because if not, you're sort of set there in darkness, and you're set there, in a despair that we will just be in this room forever in these four walls, and we're never going home, and nothing's ever going to change. And we've all had that moment where you feel there. All right, that's it. We're here for the rest of time, and this is my new home, and I live here now, and that's it. And someone has to be like, no, it does actually come to an end, right? And
to hear that person talk about their kid like it's a real kid, and it's not. Right? Because when you're in that moment, you're like, this fragile baby, I'll never be able to have like real kid experiences. So they're like, well, how's your son today? I'm like, he's 14 and he's on my nerves. So if you want him, I'm happy to drop him off up here to you, because I'm over it. Like the NICU thing, I'm over it. He's 14, he's annoying. Next question. Right? But to hear somebody be able to go from, I was terrified in this room shaking, and I never thought that he's 14. I'm over it. Like every other parent is over their child. Me too. I don't care how horrible the experience started. I'm over it. Like this kid is 14 and on my nerves. Right?
I used to teach middle school. I can relate.
Ladies, thank you so much. As you can no doubt here to our audience, this is a topic that we can talk for hours and hours and hours about, because there's so many pieces that we can pick out that we may need to go into a little bit more detail. And unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time. There was a question in the chat about doulas, and I know what you're probably going to say to me, but can you just briefly talk about whether you had that thought about using a doula? Did you know what a doula was? Did you plan to use a doula as you got closer to the end of your pregnancy?
Kimberly, I'll let you go.
I was going to have a natural birth with rainbows and sparkles and a doula and no medication and, immediate, like, no cord clamping and colostrum at the breast and all of these like very fancy ideas, right? And so yeah, all of that was very much planned. But they say you want to make God laugh, you make a plan, right? And so it's this moment of saying, well, best laid plans in that sense. And so yeah, I had thought all of that was going to be possible. And I think there's a balance to be had there, right? There's a balance to be saying, I want to have this idea and I want to have this plan and I want to have the advocacy for myself. But life happens and you have to be able to hold space, like you were saying, to grieve that loss, right? To hold space to say, and that's a big thing I say, like, we have to understand that NICU parents are grieving, right? They're grieving the loss of normalcy. They're grieving the loss of joy, of saying that the day my child was born was the most joyous day of my life. And I'm saying, well, no, it's kind of the scariest. So, that's a very big piece. I mean, at the same time, realize that you can make new plans, you can make new goals and different memories, and being able to hold both of those things and not be held to the idea that they're mutually exclusive, right? And not be held to the idea of, if I didn't have this, nothing else is possible, right? There has to be space for all of that to exist, because human emotions in life are all very much in the gray space and never black and white, right?
Facts.
Ladies, I want to thank you so much. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say I had beautiful plans too, and then I went to Waffle House, and so
and that was the turning point. I want to thank you so much. I want to thank you both so much for being willing to share from your heart, for being vulnerable, and also showing us how strong you both were and continue to be. And that you've turned what was a challenging period in your lives into really looking to support other families that may be going through similar experiences. And that's where that whole village idea does come into play. So I want to thank you both for being with us, and also for the continuing work that you do to support these families that are going through this experience.
Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.